Genesis 17:1-2. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty God, walk before me and be blameless. And I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly.
13 years after the birth of Ishmael, God appears to Abram again, introducing himself as Almighty God, or in Hebrew, El Shaddai. God calls Abram to live a life of faith and integrity, and promises to further expand Abram's offspring. As we progress in these biblical stories, it's important to recognize the evolving relationship between God and His people, how He reveals Himself to them, and how His promises unfold over time. Abram's story, in particular, highlights the longevity of faith, the richness of God's promises, and the value of obedience and trust in God's plans.
Genesis 17:3-5. Then Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations.
In response to God's appearance and words, Abram falls on his face, a gesture of reverence and humility. God reaffirms His covenant, promising Abram that he will become a father of many nations. This promise is so certain that God changes Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of a multitude, even before the promise has been fully realized. The name change signifies a new identity in line with God's promise and purpose for Abraham.
Genesis 17:6-8. And I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you and their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants after you. Also I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God.
God continues to detail the extent of His covenant with Abraham. He will not only be exceedingly fruitful, but nations and kings will descend from him. Moreover, this covenant will extend to his descendants, an eternal bond between them and God. As part of this covenant, God confirms the promise of the land of Canaan to Abraham and his offspring as an everlasting possession. In these passages, we see the profound transformation of Abraham's identity and destiny according to God's promise. As you reflect on these verses, think about the depth and breadth of God's covenant with Abraham, and what it means to have a covenant relationship with God.
Genesis 17:9-14. And God said to Abraham, As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep, between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male child among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male child in your generations, he who is born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner who is not your descendant. He who is born in your house and he who is bought with your money must be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised male child, who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people, he has broken my covenant.
God instructs Abraham about the sign of this covenant, circumcision. Every male child among his descendants is to be circumcised at 8 days old. This is not limited to his direct descendants only but also includes those born in his house or purchased with money. This physical act is to serve as a lasting symbol of the covenant in the flesh of Abraham and his descendants. God also makes it clear that failure to comply with this command is a violation of the covenant. This is the institution of circumcision as a religious rite in the Abrahamic faith. It signifies a physical mark of the covenant, linking the promise to the body of each male descendant of Abraham. As you ponder these verses, reflect on the significance of this symbol of covenant relationship and the seriousness of its observance as commanded by God.
Genesis 17:15-16. Then God said to Abraham, As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and also give you a son by her, then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations, kings of people shall be from her.
God then turns his attention to Sarai. Just as he changed Abram's name to Abraham, he now changes Sarai's name to Sarah, which means princess. Beyond the name change, God promises to bless her and give her a son, ensuring that she will also be part of the promise to create a great nation. She is to be the mother of nations, and kings will descend from her.
Genesis 17:17-18. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before you.
Abraham's initial response is laughter, likely stemming from the sheer improbability of such an event given their advanced age. Despite his laughter, Abraham's faith does not waver. He humbly asks God to bless Ishmael, his son by Hagar, indicating his care for Ishmael and perhaps his doubt about the possibility of Sarah bearing a child. In these passages, we see the expansiveness of God's promise extending to Sarah, and Abraham's human reaction to the divine promise. This encounter showcases the interface of divine providence and human emotion, reminding us of the wonder and astonishment that often accompanies God's promises. As you contemplate these verses, reflect on the magnitude of God's promises and the depth of Abraham's faith.
Genesis 17:19-21. Then God said, No, Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this set time next year.
God reaffirms his promise to Abraham, insisting that Sarah will bear him a son to be named Isaac, which means he laughs, perhaps as a nod to Abraham's laughter at the improbability of the situation. God promises to establish his everlasting covenant with Isaac and his descendants. Addressing Abraham's concern for Ishmael, God assures Abraham that he has heard him and will bless Ishmael as well, making him fruitful and the father of 12 princes, signifying a great nation. Yet, God clarifies that his specific covenant will be with Isaac, who is to be born to Sarah at a specified time in the coming year.
Genesis 17:22. When he finished talking with him, God went up from Abraham.
God's conversation with Abraham concludes, and he ascends, leaving Abraham with an expanded understanding of the covenant and a renewed promise that includes his wife Sarah. As you meditate on these verses, think about the specificity of God's promises, and how he hears and addresses the concerns of his people. Consider also the roles that both laughter and faith play in this story. Abraham laughs at the unlikely promise but also displays deep faith in God's plan.
Genesis 17:23-27. So Abraham took Ishmael his son, all who were born in his house and all who were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskins that very same day, as God had said to him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. That very same day Abraham was circumcised, and his son Ishmael, and all the men of his house, born in the house or bought with money from a foreigner, were circumcised with him.
In response to God's command, Abraham promptly performs the circumcision on every male in his household, himself included. This act serves as a clear sign of his unwavering obedience to God's command and his deep commitment to the covenant God has established with him. Ishmael, his son, is also circumcised, showing that he is part of this covenant relationship. This final verse in the chapter underscores the inclusiveness of the covenant, embracing not just Abraham and his direct descendants, but every male in his household. These passages demonstrate the importance of obedience in the covenant relationship. As you reflect on these verses, consider the extent of Abraham's obedience and his commitment to God's command, and what that means for his relationship with God and his role as the father of many nations. We're now moving into Genesis chapter 18, where we see Abraham entertaining some very special guests.
Genesis 18:1-2. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him, and when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the ground.
Abraham encounters 3 men by the terebinth trees of Mamre. Notably, the passage begins by stating that the Lord appeared to Abraham, yet it immediately refers to 3 men. This is a prelude to the theophany, or appearance of God, that unfolds in the ensuing verses. Abraham shows hospitality by running to meet the men and bowing to them, a customary show of respect.
Genesis 18:3-5, and said, My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, Do as you have said.
Abraham humbly asks the visitors to stay, offering to provide water for washing their feet, an act of hospitality in a desert region, and a place to rest under a tree. He also offers them something to eat. His eager hospitality is received, and the visitors ask him to do as he has said. In these verses, we witness Abraham's generous hospitality and his recognition of these visitors' significance. The nature of these visitors will be revealed as the chapter unfolds. For now, consider how Abraham's humble and eager service to these visitors reflects his character and his relationship with God.
Genesis 18:6-8, So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate.
Abraham springs into action, instructing Sarah to quickly prepare bread from fine meal, signifying that it is a special occasion. He also selects a tender and good calf for the meal, further emphasizing the extent of his hospitality. After preparing the food, he personally serves it to the visitors, standing nearby as they eat.
Genesis 18:9-10, Then they said to him, Where is Sarah your wife? So he said, Here, in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door which was behind him.
The visitors inquire about Sarah, who has been in the tent. Then, one of them, speaking with divine knowledge, promises that when he returns, Sarah will have a son. Sarah, overhearing this promise from the tent, is about to have a reaction similar to Abraham's upon hearing the very same news. These verses reveal the extraordinary nature of these visitors and their message, reinforcing the promise God made to Abraham in the previous chapter. As you contemplate these passages, reflect on the intertwining themes of hospitality, divine promise, and human responses to God's unexpected announcements.
Genesis 18:11-12, Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also.
Here we see Sarah's response to the visitor's prophecy. The text reminds us of Abraham and Sarah's old age, making it clear that Sarah is past childbearing years. Hearing the promise that she will have a son, she laughs within herself, questioning the possibility of such an event given their advanced age. Sarah's laughter mirrors Abraham's reaction in the previous chapter, indicating a shared incredulity yet contrasting with Abraham's outward demonstration of faith.
Genesis 18:13-15, And the Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I surely bear a child, since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you, according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, No, but you did laugh.
The Lord directly addresses Sarah's disbelief, asking Abraham why she laughed and questioning if anything is too hard for him. This rhetorical question serves as a reminder of God's omnipotence, that no task is too great for him to accomplish. Despite Sarah's denial out of fear, God gently corrects her, insisting, No, but you did laugh. As you reflect on these verses, consider the theme of divine power and human disbelief. How does God's response to Sarah's laughter reaffirm his power and the certainty of his promises? How does this exchange shape your understanding of Sarah's character and her faith journey?
Genesis 18:16-18, Then the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing, since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him?
After the meal, the men, including the Lord, prepare to leave for Sodom, with Abraham accompanying them. Meanwhile, the Lord contemplates whether to disclose to Abraham the plans for Sodom. He considers Abraham's future, the promise that he will become a great and mighty nation, and his role as a blessing to all nations.
Genesis 18:19, For I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him.
God's reflection continues, acknowledging his relationship with Abraham. The purpose of this relationship is outlined, that Abraham may guide his descendants and his household to follow God's ways, embodying righteousness and justice. This follows the expectation set in God's covenant with Abraham, further reinforcing the condition of the promise God made. These passages remind us of Abraham's unique relationship with God, characterized by open communication and mutual understanding. As we proceed, think about the significance of God choosing to share his plans with Abraham and the implications of this decision for their relationship.
Genesis 18:20-21, And the Lord said, Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I will know.
The Lord reveals his concerns about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities have drawn his attention due to their grave sinfulness, reflected in the outcry against them. God's declaration that he will go down now and see doesn't imply ignorance on his part, but rather an intention to investigate personally and ensure justice is served.
Genesis 18:22, Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord.
The other two men, who are now understood to be angels, set off toward Sodom, while Abraham remains in the Lord's presence. This creates an opportunity for a dialogue between Abraham and God that further highlights their unique relationship. Reflecting on these passages, consider how God's response to the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah reinforces the themes of divine justice and righteousness. Also, think about Abraham's role as an intermediary between God and humanity, which will soon become even more apparent.
Genesis 18:23-25, And Abraham came near and said, Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city, would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked, far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right?
Abraham, understanding God's intentions towards Sodom and Gomorrah, pleads for the cities. He asks God if he would spare the cities if there were 50 righteous people within them, emphasizing that it would be uncharacteristic of God to destroy the righteous along with the wicked. Abraham's plea showcases his understanding of God's nature as a fair and just judge.
Genesis 18:26, So the Lord said, If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes.
God answers Abraham's plea affirmatively, agreeing that if 50 righteous individuals are found within the city, he will spare it for their sake. This response showcases God's mercy and his willingness to extend grace where righteousness is found. As you reflect on these verses, consider the deepening relationship between God and Abraham. Abraham's ability to intercede and negotiate with God illustrates his increasing understanding of God's nature, as well as his own growing faith and courage.
Genesis 18:27-28, Then Abraham answered and said, Indeed now, I who am but dust and ashes have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose there were 5 less than the 50 righteous, would you destroy all of the city for lack of 5? So he said, If I find there 45, I will not destroy it.
Abraham, maintaining his humility, continues his intercession, suggesting a scenario in which there are just 45 righteous individuals instead of 50. God, in his mercy, agrees that he would not destroy the city if he finds 45 righteous people.
Genesis 18:29-32, And he spoke to him yet again and said, Suppose there should be 40 found there. So he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then he said, Let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak, suppose 30 should be found there. So he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, Indeed now, I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord, suppose 20 should be found there. So he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20.
Abraham continues to negotiate, decreasing the number of righteous individuals each time, from 40 to 30, and then 20. Each time, God agrees that he would spare the city for the sake of the righteous.
Genesis 18:33, Then he said, Let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more, suppose 10 should be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place.
Finally, Abraham asks about 10 righteous individuals, and once again, God affirms that he would not destroy the city if 10 righteous people could be found there. After this negotiation, the Lord leaves, and Abraham returns to his place. Reflecting on this passage, we see Abraham's intercessory role and his understanding of God's mercy and justice. God's willingness to spare the cities for the sake of a righteous few demonstrates his commitment to righteousness and his patience with humanity.